Welcome, dear listeners. This is Deep Sleep Tales, a haven where we accompany you with stories touched by the pale light of the past. Now find yourself a comfortable place. Let your body rest where it lies. Let your pillow cradle your head gently. Let your blanket wrap and embrace you. Lower your eyes slowly, if they're still open. Take a deep, slow breath and release. Once more, and release. Send out all the heaviness of the day, all the chaos, all the worries with this breath. Let only this moment remain, only this voice, only this tale. Allow my voice to carry you to the past, to a small town by the sea, into winter's harsh but tranquil arms. In the winter of 1887, on the southwestern coast of England, in the gentle curves of the Devon shores, there stood a small town called Seabrook. This town, like many coastal towns, was a world that lived and breathed with the sea, that knew the wind and the waves, that walked with the rhythm of the seasons. Its houses rose from stone and brick, their walls darkened by centuries of salt-laden winds, their roofs covered with tiles, their chimneys quietly smoking each evening. Its streets were narrow and winding, the cobblestones taking on a gleaming gray hue from rain and sea spray, and these streets descended toward the shore slowly, like a stream yearning for the ocean. In the heart of the town, at a corner of the main square, stood a building somewhat larger, somewhat more imposing than the others. This was the town's library, or rather what had once been a library, then abandoned over the years, erased from memory. The building was 2 stories, its facade built of limestone, with large arched windows opening on its front face. These windows once glowed with warm light seeping from within, but now stood dark and empty, their glass fogged with dust and sea mist. Its door of heavy oak, framed with iron, with a rusted ring hanging upon it, had been locked for years. The roof tiles above were missing in places, yet the structure still stood upright, as if watching for someone to return one day, to bring it back to life. The townspeople saw this building, but pretended not to. Children flowed past it while playing. Women glanced at it on their way to market, and turned their faces away. Men returning from the tavern looked at the dark windows and sighed inwardly. Everyone knew that the library had once been the town's pulse, a paradise where people gathered, read books, conversed, where children listened to tales, but the librarian had died 10 years ago, and no one had come to take his place. Thus the building was slowly forgotten, its doors bolted, the books inside surrendered to dust and damp. Eliza Thornton was a young woman who lived in this town. She was 26 years old, tall and slender, her hair dark chestnut and usually gathered at the nape, her eyes a gray-blue tone, like the place where sea and sky meet. Her dress was plain and humble. She usually wore a dark green woolen dress, threw a black cloak over it on cold days, wore a small hat on her head. Eliza lived in a small cottage in the town's outskirts, near the shore, alone, for she had no family left. Her mother had passed from illness years ago. Her father had been lost at sea in a storm, and Eliza was left on her own, but this state had not crushed her. Rather, it had hardened her, granted her a quiet determination and peace. Every morning, at dawn's breaking, Eliza would leave her house and walk to the shore. This was a ritual for her, to see the day's first rays, to listen to the sea's soft whisper, to feel the cold wind touch her face. The shore was especially enchanting in winter, the sand wet and dark, the waves slow and rhythmic, the sky in pale gray tones, the sun rising slowly from the horizon painting it in pink and orange hues. Eliza would stand here, clasping her hands beneath her cloak, breathing in and out, and thinking about life, the past, tomorrow, and most of all about that old library. As a child, her father would often take her to the library. In those days, the librarian was an old gentleman named Mr. Ashford, white-bearded, soft-smiled, always perching his spectacles on the tip of his nose. Mr. Ashford would show Eliza books, converse with her, guide her in reading and writing. The library was warm and bright in those days. A fire always burned in the fireplace. Lanterns glowed on the walls. Hundreds of books lined the shelves. The scent of paper and ink drifted through the air. Eliza missed those times, that peace, that safety, that sense of belonging. And within her, slowly, a dream had grown. One day, to find a way to reopen that library, to return it to its former days, to bring that warmth and light back to the town. But this was not an easy matter. The library belonged to the town, but no one tended to it. The mayor, elderly Mr. Whitmore, would shrug whenever asked. "No funds," he'd say. "The people aren't interested," he'd say. Eliza had spoken with him several times, pleaded, but each time received the same answer. "No, it's impossible right now, perhaps in the future." And so Eliza had waited patiently, but while waiting, she had also been designing ways to take action. It was mid-January, a Saturday afternoon. The weather was cold and windy, the sky covered with thick gray clouds, the sea choppy and restless. Eliza had not walked to the shore that day. Instead, she had stepped toward the town center, toward the square. Her clothing was thick. She had wrapped a large cloak over her woolen dress, wore woolen gloves on her hands, the small hat on her head swaying in the wind. As she walked, she observed the streets, the stone walls, the shuttered windows, the smoke rising from chimneys. The town seemed quiet and drowsy on this winter afternoon. Only a few people were on the streets, heads bowed, walking unhurriedly toward their homes. When Eliza reached the square, she stopped. Before her stood the library, large and silent, looking at her with its dark windows. For a moment she stood there, studying the building, then took a deep breath and approached. When she reached the door, she raised her hand and touched the old rusted ring. The ring was cold, rough, the metal bearing years of rust. Eliza pressed the ring gently, and surprisingly, the door shifted slightly. It wasn't locked. Perhaps the lock had deteriorated over the years. Perhaps someone had forgotten to lock it when it last closed. Whatever the case, the door was open. Eliza pushed the door slowly. The door creaked, its hinges rusted, and the sound echoed in the silence. Inside was dark, but the dim light filtering from outside faintly illuminated the entrance hall. Eliza took a step, then another. The wooden floor beneath her feet groaned. Dust rose into the air, clouding and mixing. The smell was old, a mixture of damp, dust, and paper, but there was also a familiarity, as if the scent of the past, the fragrance of memories. Inside, the entrance hall was small and dark. To the right was a staircase, a narrow staircase climbing to the upper floor, its steps covered with dust. To the left was a large door, the door opening to the main reading room. Eliza turned to that door, pushed it slowly, and slipped inside. The room was large and striking, but also gloomy. The ceiling was high, supported by wooden beams, painted but the paint peeling in places. Darkened, along every wall were shelves, wooden shelves stretching from floor to ceiling, and on these shelves were hundreds, perhaps thousands of books, but the books were covered in dust. Some had fallen from the shelves, lay on the floor, their pages warped from moisture. The windows were large, but the glass so dirty and misty that the light entering was dim and gray, sunbeams illuminating dust particles, making them drift through the air. In the center stood a large fireplace built of stone, its interior filled with ash and charred wood remnants. Before the fireplace were several armchairs and sofas, their fabrics faded, torn, stuffing spilling out. In a corner stood a large wooden table, upon it old lanterns, an inkwell, pens, all beneath a blanket of dust. On the walls hung old paintings, landscape pictures, portraits, but all darkened, details indistinguishable. Eliza stood in the room, looked around, and something filled within her. There was sorrow. Yes, she grieved that this beautiful space had come to this state, but there was also hope, for this space was still here, still standing, could still be saved. And most importantly, there was determination. Eliza knew in that moment She knew what she would do. She would reopen this library, alone, without anyone's permission, without anyone's help, only with her own hands, her own labor. In the following days, Eliza came to the library every day. In the early morning hours, before the townspeople had awakened, she would open the door and enter. She would bring cleaning supplies with her, a broom, cloths, a bucket, soap, and she would begin cleaning. The first day, she cleaned only the entrance hall and staircase. She used the broom, swept the dust, wiped the corners, polished the windows. As her hands worked, her mind relaxed. The movement itself, the body's physical labor, was like meditation. The broom moved rhythmically across the floor, dust slowly gathering, collecting in corners, then being swept outside. As the windows were wiped, the glass gradually cleared. The view of the square outside sharpened. Light entered more brightly. The second day, she moved to the main room. First, she swept the floor, gathered all the dust, dirt, fallen leaves, dead insects. Every corner, every crack, every gap was carefully cleaned. The broom made a soft sound on the wooden floor, rhythmic, monotonous, soothing. Eliza noticed as she did this work that her mind emptied, her thoughts settled. While hands worked, the mind rested, and this was a strange but pleasant feeling. After the floor was cleaned, she began wiping surfaces with cloths. First, she approached the large wooden table. The table stood in the center, probably a century-old piece of furniture. Enormous, solid, heavy, its surface was covered with dust and grime, but beneath, the natural beauty of the wood waited. Eliza took a wet cloth, added soap, and slowly began wiping. The cloth moved across the table's surface in circles, dust slowly lifting, wood emerging. It was dark brown, rich grained wood, probably oak, gleaming with years of patina. Eliza carefully wiped every square inch, its corners, edges, legs. After being wiped, the table seemed to come alive, returned to life, regained its value. Then she moved to the armchairs and sofas. There were 6 armchairs and 3 sofas in total, scattered around the room, some by the fireplace, some before the windows. The fabrics were old, their colors faded, green, burgundy, blue tones blended together. In some places were tears, seams had opened, stuffing had spilled out. But the structure was sound, the wooden frame still strong. Eliza examined each armchair individually, noted which seams needed repair. She wiped the surfaces with cloth, removed the dust, worked to remove stains. Some stains didn't come out, the mark of years, of tea, of ink, of time. But these stains gave the furniture character, a story, a past. The lanterns were rusted, but could be cleaned. There were 8 lanterns in total, distributed on walls and tables. Some were metal, some glass, some ceramic. Eliza took down each one, disassembled them into parts. The glass parts were washed in hot soapy water, metal parts cleaned with vinegar water. Rust slowly dissolved. Wicks were checked. Some needed replacing, some were still usable. Each lantern was reassembled, placed back in position. When evening came, oil would be poured into them. They would be lit, and the room would fill with that old warm light. The third day, she began on the shelves. This was the part requiring the longest and most patient work. The shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, covered every wall, and housed hundreds, perhaps thousands of books. Eliza brought a ladder, an old wooden ladder, its steps a bit loose but still solid. She leaned the ladder against the first shelf and slowly climbed. Each step creaked slightly under her weight, but held. She started from the top shelf. This was the least used, most forgotten shelf. The dust layer was thick. Spider webs covered the corners. Eliza first cleaned the wooden surface. She wiped with a dry cloth, swept the dust, removed the webs. After being cleaned, the wood was dark-colored and grained, bearing the mark of years. Then she moved to the books. On each shelf were about 20 to 30 books, tightly packed, leaning against each other. Eliza took out each book individually. She held it in her palm, felt its weight, observed its size. Each book was a world. Some were thick and heavy, leather-bound, decorated with gold letters, encyclopedias, history books, philosophy works. Their covers were embossed with delicate engravings, faded within time, but still magnificent. Some were thin and light, soft-papered, colorfully covered, novels, poetry books, tales. Some covers were worn, corners broken, but the pages inside were still intact. Each had its own particular scent: old paper scent, slightly sour, slightly sweet, the scent of time; ink scent, metallic, sharp, the fragrance of thoughts; leather scent, rich, deep, the breath of the past. Eliza sometimes brought the books to her nose, took a deep breath, drew these scents in. These scents carried her to her childhood, to the days when she came to the library holding her father's hand, to the moments when Mr. Ashford showed her books. She opened each book, checked the pages. Were they stuck together from moisture, torn, stained? Some books were truly in bad condition, their pages yellowed, corners broken. Some pages completely stuck together, wouldn't separate. Eliza tried to separate these pages, gently, patiently, but sometimes the page tore, pieces broke off. She set these books aside, formed a separate pile. Perhaps she could find a bookbinder. Perhaps some pages could be saved. Covers had come off, bindings had fallen apart. Her heart ached for these books, but there was nothing she could do. But most books, thankfully, were still good. They had only seen dust and neglect, but the structure was sound. Pages were readable. Eliza cleaned these books carefully. With a soft brush, she removed the dust from the edges of pages. Each page was brushed separately. Dust slowly fell, mixed into the air. With a dry cloth, she wiped the covers, worked to remove stains. Some stains came out, some didn't. The mark of years, of tea, of ink, of fingerprints. Each book, after being cleaned, seemed to wake from deep sleep, its colors reviving, its letters becoming distinct, regaining its value. And then the organizing began. Eliza decided to divide the books into categories: fiction books in one section, history books in another section, poetry books in a separate place, science books separate, children's books separate, religious books, philosophy books, travel books. Each took its own place. Each category took its own shelf, and each shelf was arranged in alphabetical order. This work took days. Every day, Eliza would come in the morning, climb the ladder, clean the shelves, take out books, check them, clean them, categorize them, arrange them, and return home in the evening. Her hands ached from constant movement. Her back hurt from climbing up and down the ladder. Her eyes were tired from reading small letters. But every evening, on her way home, her heart would be full. For every day, she progressed another step. Every day, the library drew closer to its former days. One evening, on her way home, she met the town's baker, Mrs. Cooper. Mrs. Cooper was a middle-aged, plump, cheerful woman, always smiling. When she saw Eliza, she stopped and looked with curiosity. "Eliza, dear," she said, "I heard you go to the library every day. What are you doing there?" Eliza smiled. "I'm cleaning, Mrs. Cooper. I'm trying to reopen the library." "Oh, how wonderful," said Mrs. Cooper. "This town really needed this. You know, I used to go there as a child, too. Mr. Ashford always gave me fresh cookies. Those days were so lovely." "Yes," said Eliza, "and I hope lovely days will come again." Mrs. Cooper took Eliza's hand with warm hands. "You're such a good girl, Eliza. The town should be proud of you. If you need anything, just say the word. You know I bake fresh bread every day. You can come and get some." Eliza thanked her and continued on her way. But inside, she was warmed by this simple kindness, this support. The townspeople might not yet be fully aware of what she was doing, but slowly they cared, they noticed, and this was enough. Days passed, weeks passed. Eliza came every day, early in the morning, and stayed until late evening. No one knew what she was doing, or no one cared. The townspeople, sometimes passing by the square, would see light seeping from the library's window and wonder, but no one entered to ask. Eliza was alone in this work, but loneliness didn't bother her. On the contrary, it gave her a sense of freedom and purpose. One day, while cleaning inside the fireplace, removing old ash and wood remnants, she noticed a small gap behind the fireplace, between the bricks. Curiously, she reached her hand in and pulled out a small box. The box was made of metal, rusted, but still closed. Eliza carefully opened the box, and inside found old letters, photographs, and a journal. The journal belonged to Mr. Ashford, the old librarian. Eliza took the journal in her hand, slowly turned the pages. The writing was in old ink, in a trembling handwriting. Mr. Ashford wrote in his journal about the library, the townspeople, the books, his hopes. On one page it read, "Young Eliza came today. I gave her Gulliver's Travels." Her eyes sparkled, as if I had given her a magic key. When children grow up with books, they see the world differently. I hope Eliza grows up enough to understand the value of these books one day, and perhaps, who knows, perhaps one day she'll return to this library. As Eliza read these lines, her eyes filled. Mr. Ashford remembered her, believed in her, and now, years later, Eliza truly had returned, just as Mr. Ashford had hoped. She pressed the journal to her chest, took a deep breath, and something softened inside. A weight lifted, as if she had formed a connection with the past, as if Mr. Ashford's spirit was supporting her here, in this work. When they entered February, the library was unrecognizable. The floor was clean and shining, the shelves orderly and dust-free, books arranged in rows. Eliza had cleaned the inside of the fireplace, brought new logs, begun lighting fires. When the fire first burned, it spread warm light and heat through the room. The walls brightened, shadows danced, and life returned to this old space. Eliza had washed the curtains, treated the old fabrics, and hung them back on the windows. The curtains were thick velvet, dark red in color. Their color had faded over the years, but was still impressive. The windows were now kept open during the day, so sunlight entered and closed in the evenings to keep the warmth inside. The lanterns had been cleaned, filled with oil, their wicks changed, and were lit in the evenings. The lantern's light, soft and golden, gave the room an ancient atmosphere. The armchairs and sofas had been repaired, tiers sewn, surfaces wiped, and new cushions placed on them. Cushions Eliza had sewn from old fabrics in her own home. The table was polished and shining. Upon it now lay clean papers, new pens, an inkwell. The paintings on the walls had been wiped, their frames polished, and the details of the pictures had become visible again. One painting showed a seascape, waves and rocks, sunset colors. In another, an old tree, its branches wide and leaves fallen. Beneath it sat a man reading a book. One day, Eliza found the town's carpenter, Mr. Fletcher, and asked him to make a small sign. Mr. Fletcher was an old and experienced man. His hands had large calluses, but there was a gentle light in his eyes. He listened to Eliza's request, nodded, and agreed. A few days later, he brought a beautiful wooden sign. On it was written, "Library open to all townspeople, every day." Eliza hung the sign on the library's door, and that day, for the first time, left the door completely open. The first visitor was a child, a boy about 8 or 9 years old, blonde-haired, freckled, looked inside with curious eyes. Eliza was sitting behind the table, reading a book. When she saw the child, she smiled. "Welcome," she said in a soft voice. "Would you like to come in?" The child hesitated, then slowly entered. He looked around, his eyes widened. "This place is amazing," he said in a low voice. "Thank you," said Eliza. "You can take any book you like. You can read here. Sit by the fireplace. It's warm and comfortable." The child walked to the shelves, looked at the books, then chose one. It was a book of tales, illustrated, with colorful covers. He sat on the sofa by the fireplace, tucked his feet beneath him, and began reading. Eliza sat at the table, continued with her own book, but at the same time watched the child, his absorption in the book, his attention as he turned pages, and warmth filled within her. From that day on, the child came every day, and over time, other children began coming too. First one, then two, then 5 children. They would sit and read books, ask Eliza questions, tell each other tales. Eliza helped them, recommended books, explained difficult words, and sometimes quietly sat beside them, listening to them read. Then adults began coming, first a few elderly women, then a few men, then younger people. Some came to borrow books, some just to sit and warm up, some to chat. Eliza treated everyone kindly, smiled, talked, but wasn't overly talkative, only as much as needed, only as much as they felt comfortable. The townspeople slowly realized that the library had reopened. The mayor, Mr. Whitmore, came in one day, bewildered and with mixed feelings. When he saw Eliza, he frowned. "Miss Thornton, what are you doing here?" "This building was closed," Eliza answered in a calm voice. "The door was open, Mr. Whitmore. I came in, cleaned, and opened it for the townspeople's service." "But you didn't ask permission," said Mr. Whitmore. "You needed my permission." "You know, Mr. Whitmore," said Eliza, in her voice, "was never anger or defiance, only thoughtful patience. I asked you for permission several times. Each time you said no, but I couldn't wait. This town needed this library. The children, the elderly, everyone. I just did what was necessary." Mr. Whitmore stood there for a moment, then looked around. He saw the clean shelves, the orderly books, the burning fire, the reading children. His face softened. "Well," he said, somewhat embarrassed, Perhaps you're right. Perhaps this town truly needed this space." Eliza smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I hope from now on we can support this space together as a town." Mr. Whitmore nodded and left, and from that day on, the library was officially open, with the town's permission, with the town's support. The municipality allocated a small budget for book purchases, for repairs, and for Eliza to receive a small salary. Eliza gladly accepted this offer, for the library had now become a full-time job, and she had completely dedicated herself to this work. In March, spring slowly began arriving. Days lengthened, weather warmed, the first flowers bloomed in gardens. But the library maintained winter's warm and comfortable atmosphere. Fire still burned in the fireplace. Lanterns were lit in evenings, curtains opened during the day. Spring sunshine filtered through the windows. One evening, an elderly woman, Mrs. Hartley, came. Mrs. Hartley was one of the town's oldest residents in her 80s, hunched and slow walking, but her mind was sharp and her eyes bright. When she entered through the door, she had a cane in one hand, a small basket in the other. Her walk was slow, each step careful, but determined. Eliza rose from the table, walked toward her, extended her hand to help. "Mrs. Hartley," she said in a warm voice. "Welcome. Here, let me take your arm." Mrs. Hartley smiled. "Oh, Eliza dear," she said, "you're always so thoughtful. Thank you." She took Eliza's arm, and together, slowly, they walked to the armchair by the fireplace. The armchair was large and soft, covered in dark green velvet, its back high. Mrs. Hartley sat in the armchair, gave a deep sigh, and leaned her cane beside her. "I heard you reopened this library," she said, looking around. "You've done such beautiful work. It's as if time has turned back." "Thank you, Mrs. Hartley," said Eliza. "Sit comfortably. Shall I make you some tea? I just brewed some. It's still hot." "I'd love some, dear," said Mrs. Hartley. "It's cold outside. A cup of hot tea is just what I need." Eliza went to a small kitchen corner behind the library. It was actually an old storage room, but Eliza had cleaned it, set up a small stove, placed a kettle, cups, sugar, milk, a cupboard. A fire burned in the stove, the flame gentle and steady. The kettle sat on the stove, steam rising from within. Eliza took 2 porcelain cups. The cups were white, with blue flower patterns on them, delicate and elegant, perhaps 100 years old. She took the kettle carefully and poured tea into the cups. The tea was deep amber in color, its scent strong, freshly brewed, Earl Grey tea. The fragrance of bergamot spread through the air. She added a bit of milk to one cup, a spoonful of sugar to the other cup, only sugar. Then she placed the cups on a tray, returned to the room with the tray. She came to Mrs. Hartley's side, placed the tray on the small table, extended a cup to the woman. Mrs. Hartley took the cup, held it with both hands, felt its warmth in her palms. She slowly brought it to her nose, took in the scent, closed her eyes, and sighed with satisfaction. "Ah," she said, "Earl Grey, my favorite. How did you know?" Eliza smiled. "A lucky guess," she said. "My favorite too." Together they sipped their tea. The silence was comfortable and peaceful, not forced. The fire crackled in the fireplace. Flames danced. Shadows played on the walls. Outside, wind blew gently, tapping softly on the window panes. In the library, there were only the two of them, and this closeness, this sharing, was special. After a while, Mrs. Hartley began to speak. "You know, Eliza," she said, a nostalgic tone in her voice, "I used to come here when I was your age, in Mr. Ashford's time. Back then, this place was so lively. Every day, from morning to evening, people came and went. The elderly, the young, children, everyone. They'd read books, chat, meet each other." Eliza listened, nodded, with an encouraging smile. Mrs. Hartley continued, "I met my husband here. His name was Harold, tall, black-haired, blue-eyed, a handsome man. He also loved reading books, history books especially. One day we both reached for the same book on a shelf. Our hands touched." Mrs. Hartley laughed, a light and pleasant laugh, like a young girl. We pulled back our hands, apologized, then looked at each other. His eyes were so blue, it was like looking at the ocean. And from that moment, everything changed. "What a beautiful story," said Eliza softly. "Who took the book then?" "He did," said Mrs. Hartley. "But after reading it, he lent it to me, and when I returned the book, he invited me for tea. We went to the small tea room in town. We talked for hours there, about books, about life, about dreams, and from that day on, we met every week in this library, read books, chatted. 6 months later, we married." "How romantic," said Eliza. "Where is your husband now?" Mrs. Hartley's face dimmed slightly, but her smile didn't disappear. "Oh, he died years ago, dear," she said, 15 years ago. "He had a heart attack. It was sudden. He didn't suffer. That was a comfort for me, but still, I miss him every day." "I'm so sorry," said Eliza, reaching out to hold Mrs. Hartley's hand. "Thank you, dear," said Mrs. Hartley, "but you know death is part of life. We'll all go one day. What matters is what we do while living, whom we love, what memories we gather, and my memories are here, in this library, in these books, in these walls. And now you've brought this space back to life, awakened these memories. For that I'm grateful to you." Eliza gently squeezed Mrs. Hartley's hand. "I'm grateful too to you, for sharing this story with me. This shows the library's spirit, its meaning. This place is not just about books, but about people, stories, connections." Mrs. Hartley nodded. "Absolutely so," she said, "and I hope it continues to be so from now on. I hope new generations come here, create new stories, gather new memories." That evening, Mrs. Hartley stayed for hours. They drank their tea. Mrs. Hartley told many more stories about her early years with Harold, their marriage, the birth of their children, the town's old days, people, events. Eliza listened carefully, sometimes smiled, sometimes felt sad, but always carefully, respectfully listened. For these stories were the town's memory, its identity, and must not be lost. And Eliza was taking mental notes, thinking she might one day write these stories, record them, pass them on to future generations. Over time, the library became not just a place for reading books, but a community center. Elderly people would come in the evenings and sit by the fireplace, chatting. Children would come after school and do their homework, read books. Young women would bring sewing or knitting and spend time together. Eliza made room for everyone, ensured everyone felt comfortable, but also maintained the quiet, for the library was a place of silence and peace. One day, a young man came. His name was Thomas. He came from outside town, from a nearby farm. He was about 25 or 30 years old, tall, dark-haired, quiet, and shy. He greeted Eliza politely and asked if she had any books about farming. Eliza led him to the shelves, showed him the agriculture section, and Thomas chose a few books. Then he sat at the table and began reading the books. Thomas began coming frequently from that day on. He was always quiet, didn't talk much, but his eyes would follow Eliza. Eliza noticed this but didn't press, remained only kind and distant. Over time, Thomas gathered courage and began talking with Eliza. Simple things, the weather, books, farm work. Eliza listened, responded, but was never overly familiar, for she didn't yet know this man and was in no hurry. One day Thomas asked Eliza a question. "Miss Thornton," he said, "why did you open this library? I mean, no one helped you. No one gave you permission. Why did you work so hard?" Eliza thought for a moment, then answered, "Because this town needed it," she said, "and I needed it too. As a child, I'd come here. I'd find peace here. Books gave me dreams." Then years passed. The library closed, and it was as if something was lost. "I wanted to bring that lost thing back. That's all." Thomas nodded. "I understand," he said, "and that's a very noble thing. They should be proud of you." Eliza smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas." Weeks passed, months passed. Spring turned to summer, summer turned to autumn. The town lived in the rhythm of the seasons, and the library became part of this rhythm. On summer days, windows were kept open. The cooling sea breeze came in. In autumn, when leaves began falling, the fireplace was lit again. Warmth and light returned. When winter came, the town became cold and windy again. But the library, as always, was a warm and safe refuge. In December, toward the end of the year, on a particularly quiet evening, Eliza sat alone in the library. The day had been busy, filled with visitors coming and going, but now, as the clock on the wall ticked toward 8 in the evening, everyone had departed to their homes, and the library had returned to its natural silence. Outside, rain had begun falling, not a harsh or violent rain, but a gentle, persistent drizzle that wrapped the town in gray stillness. The droplets tapped softly against the tall windows, creating a delicate rhythm, almost musical, like tiny fingers playing upon glass. Inside, the fire burned steadily in the fireplace, the flames dancing in shades of orange and gold, casting flickering shadows that climbed the walls. The wood crackled occasionally, releasing small bursts of sparks that floated upward before vanishing. The scent of burning oak filled the room, warm and rich, mingling with the ever-present fragrance of old books, that particular combination of aged paper, leather bindings, and dust that spoke of centuries and stories. The lanterns positioned throughout the room glowed with soft golden light, their flames steady behind glass, creating pools of warmth in the gathering darkness. Eliza sat in her favorite armchair, the large one upholstered in dark green velvet, positioned before the fireplace where she could feel its warmth on her face. She had a book in her lap, a volume of poetry she had been meaning to read, but she wasn't truly reading. Instead, she simply held the book, her fingers resting on its spine, her eyes gazing into the fire's depths, her mind wandering through corridors of memory. The rain continued its gentle percussion, and in the distance she could hear the sea, its voice carrying on the wind, that eternal rhythm of waves meeting shore, a sound so familiar it had become part of her very being. As she sat there, enveloped in warmth and quietness, Eliza found herself reflecting on the passage of time, on how swiftly this year had moved, how the months had flowed one into another, like water finding its course. It seemed both impossibly long and remarkably brief, this journey from January to December, from that first cold morning when she had pushed open the library's heavy door and stepped into darkness and dust, to this evening when she sat surrounded by order and light and the quiet satisfaction of completed work. In January, when she had first begun this endeavor, everything had been uncertain, shrouded in possibility and doubt. The task before her had seemed enormous, the work of cleaning and restoring this abandoned building, stretching ahead like an endless road. She remembered standing in the entrance hall on that first day, her breath visible in the freezing air, looking at the layers of dust coating every surface, the spider webs draped across corners, the books scattered and neglected on the floor. She had felt both determination and life. She had worried, in those early days, that perhaps no one would come even after she had finished the work. Perhaps the townspeople had truly forgotten about the library, had moved beyond their need for such a place. Perhaps her labor would be solitary and unappreciated, her dream remaining hers alone, an empty building filled with books but devoid of the human warmth that gives a library its true purpose. These thoughts had haunted her during long afternoons of scrubbing and sweeping, when her hands ached and her back hurt, when the progress seemed painfully slow. But people had come, first slowly, tentatively, a curious child peering through the doorway, an elderly woman stopping to read the sign Mr. Fletcher had made. Then, as weeks passed and word spread through the town's streets and shops, more had arrived, first in ones and twos, then in steady streams. And now, barely 11 months later, the library was once again the town's heart, a place where people gathered, not just to borrow books, but to share warmth and conversation, to find respite from their daily struggles, to remember that they were part of something larger than their individual lives. This transformation still amazed her, filled her with a quiet wonder that never quite faded. Eliza let her gaze travel slowly around the room, taking in every detail with the deep appreciation of someone who had labored over each element, who knew intimately the story behind every restored surface and repaired object. The books on the shelves stood in neat rows, their spines creating a beautiful patchwork of colors, deep burgundies and forest greens, faded blues and rich browns, gold lettering catching the firelight and gleaming softly in the dim room. Each book she had cleaned individually, had held in her hands, had examined and categorized with care. She knew their placement, their condition, their contents. Some were thick volumes bound in leather with gilt edges, encyclopedias and historical texts that weighed heavy in the arms. Others were slim poetry collections with cloth covers and delicate pages that whispered when turned. There were novels with cracked spines that spoke of being read and reread by generations, scientific treatises with detailed illustrations, collections of folk tales with woodcut prints, philosophical works dense with ideas. Each had its place, its purpose, its waiting reader. The fireplace, that magnificent structure of gray stone, dominated one wall with quiet authority. Its mantelpiece was carved with intricate patterns of leaves and vines that she had discovered beneath years of soot and grime, patterns that spoke of craftsmen long dead, but whose skill lived on in their work. The fire within burned with steady warmth, the flames casting a golden glow that pushed back the winter darkness pressing at the windows. She had cleaned that fireplace herself, scrubbing away decades of ash and neglect, and now it served its purpose again, offering heat and light and comfort to all who entered. The armchairs and sofas, those she had so painstakingly repaired, were arranged in welcoming groups around the room. Their fabrics, though worn, possessed a dignity that new furniture could never achieve. Each threadbare patch, each faded section told a story of use and comfort, of people who had sat here before, who had read and dreamed and talked in these very seats. The cushions she had added, sewn from her mother's old fabrics, brought spots of color, deep reds and golds that complemented rather than competed with the furniture's aged beauty. The paintings on the walls, cleaned and straightened, depicted peaceful scenes, seascapes with ships, landscapes of rolling hills, still lifes of flowers arranged with care. She had studied each one while cleaning them, had traced their brushstrokes with her eyes, had wondered about the artists who created them, and the people who had first hung them here. Now they watched over the library like silent guardians, their subjects frozen in eternal moments of beauty and tranquility. And everywhere, permeating every corner, was that scent old paper and leather, wood smoke and beeswax polish, with the faint sweetness of tea lingering from earlier in the day. It was the smell of safety, of knowledge, of time itself preserved and protected within these walls. Eliza breathed it in deeply and felt something settle within her, something that had been restless and searching for years finally coming to rest. Everything was exactly as it should be, she thought. Everything was in its place, serving its purpose, waiting quietly for tomorrow, when people would return and fill these rooms with life once more. In her life there had been losses. She had lost her mother, lost her father. She had been left alone, faced difficulties, but at the same time, she had gained things too. She had gained this library, gained this community, gained this purpose. And now, looking back, she thought everything had meaning. The losses had guided her to be here, at this moment, in this state, and that was a beautiful thing. In her life there had been losses, deep and painful losses, that had shaped her in ways both visible and hidden. She had lost her mother first, to an illness that came slowly but relentlessly, draining away strength and vitality, week by week until there was nothing left but memory and grief. Eliza had been young then, barely 16, and she remembered sitting by her mother's bedside in those final days, holding her hand, feeling the bones beneath the skin, watching the shallow rise and fall of breath. Her mother had spoken little toward the end, but once in a moment of clarity, she had looked at Eliza with eyes still bright and said, "Find something worth caring for, something larger than yourself." Those words had stayed with Eliza through all the years that followed. Then her father, lost to the sea in a storm that had come without warning on a summer's day. He had been a fisherman, like his father before him, and he knew the waters as well as any man in Seabrook, but the sea takes whom it will, regardless of knowledge or experience, and on that terrible afternoon, the waves had claimed him, along with 2 other men from the town. Eliza remembered standing on the shore with the other wives and daughters, watching the gray water, hoping against hope to see the boats return. But only one had come back, and her father was not on it. They had never found his body, never had anything to bury, and for months afterward, Eliza had walked the beach at dawn, searching the tide line for some sign, some remnant, though she knew it was futile. Those losses had left her alone in the world, without family, without the anchors that most people took for granted. There had been difficult years after her father's death, years of making her way with sewing and cleaning work, of living in her small cottage by the shore with only memories for company. Some in the town had pitied her, this young woman left solitary, and there had been well-meaning suggestions that she should marry, should find a husband to provide for her, to give her the security and family she lacked. But Eliza had resisted these suggestions, had chosen instead to remain independent, to make her own way, to find her own purpose. And now, looking back across the years from this quiet evening in December, she could see how those losses, as painful as they had also been necessary in some strange way. They had stripped away the easy comforts, the simple paths that others followed, and had forced her to look deeper, to ask harder questions about what truly mattered. If her parents had lived, if she had married as expected, would she be sitting here now? Would she have had the freedom, the determination, the desperate need to create something meaningful? She didn't know, couldn't know, but she suspected not. The losses had prepared her for this work, had given her the strength born of surviving grief, the clarity that comes from understanding how brief and precious life truly is. They had taught her that purpose must be chosen, not inherited, and that meaning is something we create rather than discover. But at the same time, she had gained things too, precious things that balance the scales of loss in unexpected ways. She had gained this library, this beautiful space that had become both her work and her home, her purpose and her sanctuary. Every morning when she unlocked the door and stepped inside, when she lit the lanterns and stoked the fire, When she arranged the chairs and opened the curtains to let in the day's light, she felt a sense of belonging that she had not known since childhood. This place needed her, and she needed it, a perfect symmetry of purpose and fulfillment. She had gained the community, too, these townspeople who had slowly become her extended family in ways that blood relations could never be. There was Mrs. Coper, who brought bread every Tuesday and stayed to chat about recipes and weather and grandchildren. There was Mr. Fletcher, who appeared without being asked whenever something needed repair, his weathered hands and quiet competence a constant blessing. There was young Tommy, the first child to visit, who had blossomed from a shy, uncertain boy into a confident reader, his eyes lighting up whenever he discovered a new book. There was Mrs. Hartley, with her memories and stories, Thomas from the farm with his quiet respect, the school teacher Miss Davies, who now brought her entire class once a week for reading lessons. Each person who walked through the library's door became part of Eliza's life, not in the demanding way that family can be, not with obligations and expectations that weigh heavy, but in a gentler, freer way. They came seeking books and warmth and company, and in return they gave her purpose, connection, the profound satisfaction of being useful, of making a difference in lives both large and small. Some days it was helping a child choose their first real book, watching their face transform with wonder and possibility. Other days it was simply sitting with an elderly person who needed company more than literature, listening to stories of times past, offering the gift of attention in a world that too often rushed by without seeing. And perhaps most importantly, she had gained a sense of purpose that ran deeper than any relationship or possession ever could. She had found her calling, that rare and precious thing that many people search for their entire lives without finding. Every morning she woke with direction, with tasks that mattered, with the knowledge that her labor served something greater than herself. The library was not just a building or a collection of books. It was a living thing, a beating heart that pumped knowledge and comfort and community through the town's veins. And she was its keeper, its guardian, the one who ensured it continued to serve and shelter and inspire. Looking back now across the months of this year, she could see a pattern emerging from what had seemed like random pain. The losses had guided her here, to this moment, to this state of grace. They had hollowed her out so that she could be filled with something new, had broken her down so that she could be rebuilt stronger and more purposeful. It was a beautiful thing, she thought, how suffering could be transformed into meaning if one had the courage to let it. Outside, the rain continued its gentle rhythm, steady and unhurried, the kind of rain that would last through the night and into tomorrow, soaking deep into the earth, filling wells and streams, washing the world clean. The sound of it against the windows was like a whispered conversation, soft syllables repeated endlessly, a language without words but full of meaning. And beneath it, traveling from the shore, came the sound of the sea, that low, perpetual murmur of waves advancing and retreating, a sound as old as the world itself, as constant as breath. Eliza closed her eyes and let these sounds wash over her, let them fill the spaces in her mind where thoughts usually crowded and competed. The rain, the sea, the crackle of fire, the settling creaks of the old building around her, all of it blended into a kind of music, a symphony of natural rhythms that spoke of cycles and seasons, of continuity and change, of the way things endure even as they transform. These sounds were like a lullaby to her, familiar and comforting in the way that only childhood sounds can be. They carried her back through the years to a time when she was small, when her mother would tuck her into bed on rainy nights just like this one, smoothing the blankets and stroking her hair while the storm played its music outside. Her mother's voice had been soft and low, speaking words of comfort and safety. The rain is good, Eliza. It feeds the earth, washes everything clean, makes the world new again. Listen to it and sleep, my darling. You're safe here, always safe. And her father's voice too, deeper and rougher, but equally gentle, speaking on evenings when they sat by their own fireplace, the day's work done, the small cottage warm against winter's cold. He would tell her stories, not from books, but from his own life, tales of the sea and ships, of storms survived and fish caught, of the way the ocean looked at sunrise when the sky turned pink and gold and the water became glass. His voice had carried the salt tang of his profession, the wisdom earned through years of reading wind and wave, and Eliza had absorbed his words like gospel, believing implicitly in his strength and knowledge. Mr. Ashford's voice was here too, in these walls, in this very room where he had spent so many years. She could almost hear it if she listened carefully enough. That gentle, scholarly tone he had used when showing her books, explaining difficult words, opening doors to worlds beyond Seabrook's narrow streets. Books are time machines, young Eliza, he had told her once, his spectacles slipping down his nose as they always did. They carry us to places we'll never go, let us live lives we'll never have, teach us things we'd never otherwise know. Guard them well, these time machines. They're more valuable than gold. All these voices, all these people who had shaped her and loved her and left her, they were present here in the library's silence, in its peace. They lived on in her memory, in her actions, in the very fact that she sat here now, having created something they would have been proud of. Death had taken their bodies, but it could not touch what they had given her, the lessons, the love, the foundation upon which she had built her life. And so, sitting in the firelight's warm glow, with the rain falling outside and the library quiet around her, Eliza felt gratitude rising within her chest like a tide, filling every empty space, touching every corner of her being. It was a profound and humble gratitude, not the polite thankfulness one offers for small favors, but something deeper and more fundamental, a recognition of grace, of gifts received that could never be repaid, of the mysterious way that life offers exactly what is needed, even when we cannot see it coming. She felt grateful for being alive, for drawing breath on this winter evening, for having eyes to see the firelight and ears to hear the rain, for having hands that could work and a mind that could think and a heart that could still feel after all the losses it had endured. Life itself was a gift, she understood now, in a way she had not understood as a young woman. Each day was precious, each moment irreplaceable, and the simple fact of existence, of being here now, conscious and aware, was cause for wonder. She felt grateful for this town, for Seabrook with its narrow streets and stone houses, its wind-swept shore and salt-laden air. She had been born here, had never lived anywhere else, and while there had been times when she dreamed of distant cities and exotic lands, she now recognized that this small corner of Devon coast was exactly where she belonged. The town had held her through grief, had given her purpose, had provided the stage on which her life's work could unfold. Every cobblestone in the square, every chimney releasing smoke into the winter sky, every familiar face she passed on the street, all of it was woven into her identity, inseparable from who she had become. She felt grateful for the library itself, for this building that had stood here long before her birth and would stand long after her death, this repository of knowledge and stories and human wisdom, that she had been given the opportunity to restore it, to bring it back to life and usefulness, seemed almost miraculous when she considered how easily things might have gone differently. If the door had been truly locked that January afternoon, if the mayor had been more forceful in his refusal, if she had lost courage in those early days of solitary labor, any of these things might have prevented what had happened. But instead, circumstances had aligned. Doors had opened, both literal and metaphorical, and she had been allowed to do this work. Most of all, she felt grateful for the ability to help people, to offer them something of value, to make their lives even slightly better through her efforts. Every child who discovered a love of reading here, every lonely person who found companionship, every curious mind that was fed with knowledge, these were gifts she was privileged to give, and the giving itself brought more joy than any reward or recognition ever could. She had learned that true happiness comes not from what we receive, but from what we offer, not from being served, but from serving, and this library allowed her to live that truth every single day. The gratitude filled her so completely that for a moment she felt almost overwhelmed by it, felt tears pressing at the backs of her eyes though they did not fall. It was too much feeling for one person to contain, this profound appreciation for existence and purpose and connection. and yet it was also perfectly natural, the only appropriate response to the gifts she had been given, to the life she had been allowed to live. She placed the book gently on the small table beside the armchair, marking her place, though she knew she would likely not return to it tonight, and slowly stood up, feeling the stiffness in her joints from sitting still for so long. The fire's warmth had made her drowsy, had settled into her bones in a pleasant, heavy way that made movement require conscious effort. She stretched slightly, feeling her spine lengthen, her shoulders roll back, and took a deep breath of the book-scented air. Then she walked to the nearest window, her footsteps soft on the worn wooden floor, barely making a sound. The floorboards were old and had their own geography of creaks and groans, and she knew instinctively where to step to move quietly, knowledge gained through months of walking these same paths every day. When she reached the window, she placed her hand against the frame, feeling the slight draft that leaked through the old joints despite the building's solid construction, feeling the coolness of the glass beneath her fingertips. She looked outside, into the rain-swept darkness of the square. The cobblestones gleamed wet and black, reflecting the street lamp's pale yellow light in broken, wavering patterns. Puddles had formed in the low places between stones, their surfaces dimpled and dancing with the impact of raindrops. The buildings surrounding the square stood dark and silent, most windows already shuttered for the night, only a few showing the warm glow of lamplight from within, where families gathered around their own fires, preparing for bed or sharing quiet evening hours together. The town was sleeping, or nearly so, settling into that deep quietness that comes over small places when night truly falls and the day's business is done. There would be a few people still awake, the doctor perhaps reading in his study, or the innkeeper serving late drinks to travelers, or mothers nursing infants in darkened rooms. But most of Seabrook had surrendered to rest, trusting in the safety of stone walls and locked doors, in the familiar routines that had governed life here for centuries. And the library, standing at the heart of it all, waited in its own patient silence. It did not sleep, could never truly sleep, for it held too much wakefulness within its walls. All those books, all those stories and ideas and accumulated human knowledge, all those voices speaking across centuries, all that preserved consciousness waiting to be discovered anew each day. The building itself might rest, its timbers settling and its stones cooling in the night air, but the essence of what it contained remained alert and ready, a reservoir of wisdom available to anyone who chose to seek it. Eliza felt a deep sense of rightness, looking at the sleeping town from this vantage point, felt herself to be in her proper place, performing her proper function. She was the keeper of this space, the guardian of these books, the one who ensured that when morning came and people needed what the library offered, it would be here, warm and welcoming and ready to serve. It was a responsibility she had chosen rather than inherited, and that made it all the more precious to her. The rain continued its endless percussion against the glass, each drop a tiny messenger from the sky, and she watched it for a long moment, mesmerized by the simple beauty of water falling through darkness. Then, with a small sigh of contentment, she turned from the window and walked back toward the fireplace. The fire had burned lower while she sat lost in thought, the flames diminishing to a gentler glow, and she knew it needed tending before she could retire for the night. She took the iron poker from its stand beside the hearth and carefully stirred the embers, releasing a small shower of sparks that floated upward like tiny stars. Then she selected several logs from the basket, good seasoned oak that would burn slow and steady through the night, and placed them carefully on the coals, arranging them so air could circulate and feed the flames. The wood caught almost immediately, the fire reviving, growing stronger, sending fresh warmth into the room. Satisfied that the fire would last until morning, she replaced the poker and looked around the room one final time, making sure everything was in order, that no candles remained burning that might pose danger, that the windows were secure. All was as it should be. Then she walked to the table and picked up one of the lanterns, a small brass one with a glass chimney that cast a steady, portable circle of light. She lifted it carefully, feeling its warmth, and decided it was time to go upstairs, to her small private room where she could finally let this long day come to its natural end. She entered her room. The room was small and simple: a bed, a wardrobe, a chair, a window. The window looked out to the sea, and in the evenings she could watch the sunset from here. Now outside was dark, only the sound of rain came. Eliza placed the lantern on the table beside the bed and approached the window. She opened the glass slightly, and cold air entered, touched her face. She took a deep breath, drew in the sea air, salty, damp, clean air. Then she closed the window, changed her clothes, put on her nightgown. She slowly lay down on the bed, pulled the blanket over herself. The bed was warm and soft. The pillow gently held her head. She extinguished the lantern. Darkness covered the room, but the darkness wasn't frightening, only peaceful, quiet, comforting. Eliza closed her eyes. The sound of rain, the sound of waves, the sound of wind, all mixing, becoming a melody, and this melody carried her slowly, gently, into sleep. Her thoughts slowed, stopped, her body relaxed, grew heavy, and Eliza began to sleep, a deep, peaceful sleep. In her dream, she saw the library, but this time it wasn't just the library. It was an enormous garden. Books were like flowers, blooming, scattering colors. People walked through the garden, smiling, looking happy. Children ran about. Elderly people sat and rested, and Eliza stood in the center, looking at everyone, and her heart was full, and the dream slowly faded, turned to darkness, and Eliza continued sleeping, deep, deep, deep. And now you too, like Eliza, it's time to surrender to this sweet peace. Like her, you too have made a long journey today. Perhaps you're tired, perhaps your thoughts are crowded, but now let them go. Let everything go. Are your eyes closed? If not, gently close them. There's no hurry. Slowly, softly, and now focus on your breath. Breathe in, deep, slow, and release. Once more, breathe in and release. With each breath, your body relaxes a bit more, grows a bit heavier. Your pillow holds your head, your blanket wraps around you, and you are safe. You are at peace. Allow your thoughts to flow away. The day's events, tomorrow's worries, let them all go. Right now, only this moment matters. And in this moment, there's nothing you need to do, only to lie down, only to breathe, only to be. Do you hear the sound of waves? From afar, softly, coming and going. Do you hear the sound of rain? Gentle, rhythmic, tapping on your window. These sounds carry you, soothe you, take you to sleep. Allow it, don't resist, just let yourself go. Sleep now, sleep deeply, deeply. Dream, beautiful dreams, peaceful dreams. And when you wake in the morning, you'll be rested, refreshed, peaceful. But now, just sleep. Sleep good night, sweet dreams. Sleep in peace.